You're listening to the Assembly Call IU podcast and postgame show, the place where Indiana fans across the globe hang out online after every IU basketball game. Join us for our live broadcasts on Thursday nights and immediately following every IU game at our website, assemblycall.com. That's assemblycall.com. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most urgent topics in the never-dull world of Indiana basketball. This is our 114th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 502nd episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, March 21st, 2019. I am your host, Jerod Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Martin takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment has nothing to do with what happened on the court for Indiana, but about something special that happened off the court. On March 17th, the Twitter account @TheMopLady, run by a diehard IU fan, tweeted the following, quote, "If there is anyone out there who has never had the means to take their child to Assembly Hall and you're available Tuesday night, please DM me. I would love to assist in getting you there. First come, first serve." That tweet was soon followed by this one, quote, "Currently sending 4 to the game. If anything changes, I'll reopen the offer." Well, things definitely changed. The initial tweet went viral, and scores of Indiana fans stepped up to help other IU fans make it to Assembly Hall for Indiana's NIT opener on Tuesday night. And by all accounts, the atmosphere was loud and enthusiastic, even if the overall attendance was relatively small. Dave First of WRTB6 even took notice and did a story about what the Mop Lady had created. And then the Mop Lady did it again for the Arkansas game. As of late Thursday morning, many more IU fans had stepped up. Over 150 tickets had been donated as of Thursday afternoon, with over 100 tickets being donated to Big Brothers Big Sisters of Bloomington. Fred Glass even donated his 4 tickets behind the IU bench. In short, this is Hoosier Nation at its best, looking out for one another and doing it in a way that gets more butts in the seats to support our team in the NIT. I want you to remember this story the next time a drive-by analyst or clickbait junkie tries to conflate the small but vocal gaggle of social media trolls and clowns with the entire IU fan base. It's nonsense and it's disingenuous. The Mop Lady, the many people who stepped up to donate tickets, and the diehard IU fans who gratefully accepted the tickets and cheered their butts off for our team are examples of the best this fan base has to offer. They deserve the headlines and the tweets, and this week they definitely deserve the banner moment. All right, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left, he is the Richard Pitino of Girls Youth Sports Coaching in Cincinnati. He is the president emeritus of the Robert Johnson Fan Club. And ladies and gentlemen, the new Bracket Matrix World Rankings of Bracketologists are out, and he is now, drumroll please, number 11 out of 133, 2 spots ahead of Coach Tonsoni and the previously number 1 ranked Delphi Bracketology Club. Coach, your thoughts?
I hate it.
I figured you might. Andy, it is time for your bottoms line on the last week in Indiana basketball. What you got?
Well, I would certainly echo what you said about the everything going on with the Mop Lady account. I thought that was just such a cool story, and I don't know that even I would have heard about it had it not been for, I think it was Coach brought it up on the postgame show the other night. So just a really cool thing. Anybody not following that, they're giving updates and different things like that. So a very cool thing going on. And, at this point for IU, it's hard to, sit around and watch tournament games and think and wish and hope that the team was in there, but they're not. So you look forward a little bit to Saturday's game against Arkansas and a chance to pick up another win in the NIT. And you kind of hope, looking back on the game Tuesday night, there were a lot of the teams that were some of the top teams that were put into the NIT that struggled through the first half. I think probably for a lot of the same reasons that IU did, and then really turned it on in the second half. Alabama's performance on Wednesday night notwithstanding. So I think what we saw from IU in the first half of that game was not all that uncommon, I guess, for what other teams did. But hopefully we see more of the team that showed up in the second half of that game against Arkansas, because Arkansas seems to be a team that really, took advantage and made the most of the opportunity by going up to Providence and playing really well. And I think that'll be a bigger test for IU as they go through, and an interesting game that we'll talk about later in the show.
All right, and filling in for Ryan tonight on Assembly Call Radio, he's an IU senior who cheers for North Carolina instead of IU. He unabashedly loves the NBA more than college basketball, and he's had a bad habit of jinxing every IU player he's written a profile about this season. So why is he on here? Well, you know him from our weekly Basketball 201 segments, and his post-game emails have drawn rave reviews from IU fans because he knows his basketball really well. It's our student intern, Ben Ladner. Ben, you are a member of perhaps the only graduating class in IU history to experience more NIT appearances than NCAA tournament appearances. How does that make you feel?
Well,
and should we blame you for that?
At this rate, maybe. I mean, that introduction certainly made it seem like I was pretty unqualified to come on here. But we'll wait till next year. There's not that I'm rooting for this or anything, but there's certainly a chance that next year's senior class will have even more NIT appearances than NCAA's, and you've touched on the possibility of the senior class going 4 years without an NCAA appearance, which would be unprecedented. And so obviously you hope that the team would turn it around by that point. But yes, I think I have a lot working against me when it comes to these things with being a UNC fan, an NBA fan, and apparently the sole reason why guys like Juwan Morgan and Rob Finney have had slumps at various points in the season.
It's much easier to blame it on you, though, than
it is. Yeah. And listen, as someone who does not consider themselves an IU fan, I'll take that blame. I'll take it on. I don't have any shame doing that.
You'll carry that burden for us.
Right.
No, you are definitely qualified. I just want to throw some of our inside jokes from our Basketball 201 segments in here, but we look forward to your analysis today. It's going to be fun. All right, here's what we're going to talk about this week. We'll discuss some keys to victory against in the IU Arkansas game for Indiana. We'll look at some clips and talk about some clips, some plays from that last game to see what we can learn from the first meeting between these two teams, and then we'll answer some of your questions. All of that is coming this week on Assembly Call Radio. Before we get to all that, though, let's talk about sleep. And let's talk about why you need to buy your next mattress from our friends and fellow IU grads and fans at Comfort Option. First off, they will actually come to your house. Seriously, if you live in Indy or Bloomington, you can schedule Comfort Option's revolutionary in-home mattress service.
There's a van with a bed in it, and they just put the mattress together right there, and you lay on it, and you decide if you like it or not.
Right there at your house. Plus,
they don't charge you extra to come build the mattress at your house.
They don't. And if you don't live in Indy or Bloomington, you can still order one of their Alpha mattresses online, and they'll deliver it anywhere in the U.S. Longtime Assembly Call listener Megan Mahaffey, whose voice you just heard, she and her husband went with the Alpha Medium.
We've been really, really pleased with how the Alpha Medium has felt. I am physically sleeping better.
Also, Megan's husband isn't snoring anymore, which is a massive bonus. And to top it all off, Comfort Option offers a 30-90 satisfaction guarantee to make sure you love your mattress. Bottom line, they want the mattress buying experience to be more pleasant than it's ever been.
The whole thing, start to finish, went incredibly smoothly.
So go to comfortoption.com right now and either order your Alpha mattress or schedule your in-home mattress store service today. And when you do it, use the promo code ASSEMBLY to get $50 off your purchase. Again, comfortoption.com, promo code ASSEMBLY for $50 off. Get the mattress that's right for you. Don't leave your sleep to chance. It's too important.
We want you to live.
Yes, we do. We want you to live.
Can we get some basketball, please?
Okay, back to talking basketball. Gentlemen, we have this game. Andy, you alluded to it. We talked about it a little bit there. The IU-Arkansas game coming up on Saturday. Second round of the NIT. I want to hear what you guys think are kind of the keys to victory here for IU. Andy, we'll start with you, and I'll kind of send you into it with this note, which I talked about on Podcast on the Brink earlier this week. But over the last three NITs, number one seeds are 10-2 in first-round games, but just 2-8 in second-round games. And they lose them by an average of 6.5 points. So some of those games aren't even close. So, it's interesting. My hypothesis there is that, you have these one seeds that are pretty good, close enough to make the tournament. They don't make it. They're not playing a very good team in the first round. So even as disappointed as they are, they can win it. But then in the second round, you're typically facing kind of a big conference school like in Arkansas that isn't disappointed to not be in the NCAA tournament because they had no chance, but they're actually happy to be in the NIT. And that's probably part of the reason why the last three NIT champions have been 4 seeds. So that's my hypothesis. It could also be random chance. Who knows? But what we do know is Indiana is really going to have to bring their A game, and history not necessarily on their side in this game Saturday. So given all that, what are the keys to Indiana moving on to the next round?
I think if you look at what IU needs to do defensively, the challenge of playing Arkansas is a lot different now than it was before without Daniel Gafford playing. So they become a bit more perimeter oriented. They shot the ball really well from three against Providence, I think 10 of 21. So I think that's, you start there. I mean, really the two areas from that standpoint are how do you limit them from a 3-point shooting perspective, and how do you keep them off the free throw line? They're one of the better teams in the nation in free throw rate. Gafford is a big part of that, but they've got a few other guys that have free throw rates over 40. So, it's really trying to lock down the perimeter guys. They're not all going to be, the offense isn't going to revolve around Gafford in the post, but you've got, Mason Jones, Jalen Harris, Isaiah Joe, from a perimeter perspective that are there, with Joe being the best 3-point shooter of the bunch. And then on the other end, IU's got to take care of the ball. Arkansas is 15th in defensive turnover rate in the country. And again, they can gamble a little bit more when Gafford's in there as a rim protector, but I don't think they'll probably change a lot of what they want to do in that regard. And what that can lead to on the other side, though, is they're one of the worst teams in the nation in defensive rebounding, and they're one of the worst teams in the nation in putting people on the line. So if IU can attack and really try to get some second chances, beat the initial pressure, get the ball in the paint, draw some fouls, I don't know that anybody's going to get too excited to see this team take a ton of free throws, but at least from a structural and from a strategic standpoint, that seems like the way to go for IU. So I think there's some things that Arkansas does really well, some things that they struggle with. No different than any team that makes the NIT is going to have some flaws at this point that are pretty noticeable. And so a little bit hard to tell. Not as much tape on them, at least with Gafford not there to see exactly how they're going to readjust things. But at least in terms of who their primary weapons are, they at that point become pretty much all perimeter guys.
Ben, what do you think of the keys for IU?
Yeah, I think the turnovers, that's a really good point by Andy. They turned the ball over 17 times the first time they played Arkansas. That was their third highest total of the season, matched only by that Ohio State game in the Big Ten tournament, and then they exceeded it a couple times. So you're taking care of the ball. Obviously, Arkansas is a team that likes to pressure full court. They're going to kind of lay it on you the entire game. Obviously, not having Gafford back there to protect the rim, like Andy said, it kind of limits what they can do sometimes in terms of gambling and taking chances and really going after steals and trying to force turnovers. But they're still a team that's going to dial up the intensity, dial up the pressure, and really try to speed teams up and take them out of what they want to do. So kind of in that vein, I look for maybe Indiana can try to poach some transition points, if they're able to break that initial press, get the ball past half court, create those 5-on-4 advantages, maybe 4-on-3 sometimes. And without having Gafford back there to protect the rim for Arkansas, maybe Indiana has an avenue to get to the basket a little bit more often. And, after they beat that initial press, just to try to create some easy buckets. And then on the other end of the floor, how does Indiana deal with Arkansas spacing the floor? Because that was one thing I noticed when Gafford didn't play in that first game. Arkansas was basically going with kind of a 5-out approach, trying to put as much shooting on the floor, much as athleticism on the floor as possible. Can guys like Deron Davis, Evan Fitzner handle that? Can they defend on the perimeter? Can they protect the rim at a requisite rate? And, can they close out on shooters and really limit Arkansas's 3-point shooting? I guess those would be two things that I'd look for on either end of the floor.
And from an individual standpoint, just when you look at that first game, Devontae Green did not play. So having him, certainly the way he's been playing, will be really nice. Demezy Anderson played 26 minutes in that game, if you recall. And actually did some good things in that game. But it'll be interesting to see how many minutes he gets. Two other guys that are going to have to be on the floor more. Juwan Morgan, who only played 23 minutes. Now, he was extremely efficient, but he was in foul trouble, both in the first half and early in the second half. And Justin Smith only played 15 minutes, turned it over twice. It was kind of one of those Justin Smith games where he just wasn't really there. And so if Indiana can get a better performance from him, those are some of the things you look at. And I'll tell you the other guy, and Andy, this kind of goes to your point about, getting downhill, getting to the free throw line. I think Al Durham's going to be really important. He's going to play a lot of minutes. He played 36 minutes in the first game and, did make 3 3-pointers, but was only 1 of 5 on twos, didn't get to the free throw line and turned it over 5 times. And it was really a struggle for him to take care of the ball, to kind of be strong with it. He's going to have to really play with more composure and I think be just as aggressive as we saw him be in that St. Francis game for Indiana in this one.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back as you bring up some of these things. I'm thinking back a little bit to the post-game show. I feel like Justin Smith got yanked pretty early in the second half where he went at Gafford a couple times, got blocked. and really didn't come back in hardly at all. McRoberts was out, so I think that was why Demezi played, and I think he saw some. He had, I feel like, a couple turnovers, just a couple plays where it was very evident it was his third college game, and but they needed him to eat minutes in that game, and he did that. And then the Juwan foul trouble, stuck out to me. But I do remember talking about that on the postgame show with Al. It was one of the things that I think you had brought up a number of times coming into the season, that if you really look back at the games that he excelled, it tended to be against teams that weren't going to really get into him physically and do some of the the kinds of athletes that Arkansas was able to throw at him. So I think he's improved in that area over the course of the season. The St. Francis game was a pendulum swing way back in the other direction, just given how poorly they did, how poor a job they did shutting off driving lanes and things like that. But I do think Al becomes certainly, because it seems like Romeo's not going to play. We talked about that. It's a really big opportunity for him. He really seized it on Tuesday night, but this team has to take a lot better care of the basketball, like Ben said, going into it. But hopefully, Juwan not having to guard Gafford eliminates some of the opportunity for him to get in foul trouble, and we're able to see him a little bit more. But I thought Jerod had a pretty good game in that one as well. That last foul call notwithstanding.
He did. All right, coming up on the Assembly Call, we're going to try something a little different. We're bringing Basketball 201 to Assembly Call Radio. Ben has some clips from the first Arkansas to walk us through as we get prepared for Saturday's rematch in the NIT. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com. And if you ever want to participate in our unedited live broadcast,
Chat mobbers,
or watch those replays, then check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall. I'm Jerod Morris. I'm here with Andy Bottoms and Ben Ladner.
Will this be on the podcast?
Yes, Ryan, this will be on the podcast. Real quick, another reason to subscribe to us on YouTube is the Basketball 201 segments that we've done. We're bringing that to Assembly Call Radio this week. Ben and I this year on Tuesdays have been kind of doing these Basketball 201/film session type broadcasts. And so we're going to do that now. So Ben's going to walk us through some video clips. We'll do our best to describe the clip so you can actually kind of hear what's going on and get something from this, even if you can't see it. But if you go to the YouTube page, watch the video, the unedited live broadcast from this episode, you'll actually be able to see the clip. So it obviously makes it for kind of a richer and more full experience. But with that said, Ben, let's walk through this. You look through. Now, did you look for particular types of clips, like clips without Gafford in? Is that what we're going to talk about, is those types of clips?
Yeah, that's mostly what I looked at. It was funny because Romeo Langford only played, or he only sat for 2 minutes during this entire game. But those 2 minutes were during a time where Daniel Gafford was also off the floor.
Oh, was it?
So we had this little 2 minute chunk of game time where neither Romeo nor Gafford was on the floor. I will say it was tough to glean too much meaningful data from this game because obviously Romeo and Gafford are both not playing in the NIT. And so you're going to have a large chunk of the game that's going to be not quite as relevant, I guess. And then number two, Juwan Morgan, you would figure would play more than 23 minutes in this game on Saturday rather than, being in foul trouble the entire time, which he was in the first game. And then two, I guess the third thing would be teams' rotations kind of change over the course of the season anyway, so you're probably not going to see as much Demezi Anderson. You may not see as much Evan Fitzner as you did the first time. And then I'm sure Arkansas has some rotational changes that they'll make as well. So that said, there were a couple clips that I found to be, fairly revealing just as far as what both teams might try to do and how they might deal with certain things that they might throw at each other. So the biggest thing, I touched on it kind of in that first segment, was Arkansas really wants to pressure their opponents. They really want to make you uncomfortable and kind of force you into taking some tough shots and more importantly, turning the ball over. But if they can't do that, they want to make every shot contested. They want to pick the right guys to take the shots. And so, kind of in keeping with a theme that we've seen all season for Indiana, they're going to try to force guys like Justin Smith, guys like Demezi Anderson, if he's in the game, these kind of non-threats on offense to take shots that they don't really want to. And so we'll see here in this first clip, about 11 and a half minutes to play in the first half. Obviously, lots of ball pressure, just kind of off the top. That's pretty standard with Arkansas's defense. They're going to really get into the ball. And Al Durham kind of with this sharp crossover, able to create some separation here. And so one of the themes of Arkansas's defense, and this will come up in another clip, is that because they play such a high pressure style, they really need to have solid help defense behind them. And that's one area where I think missing Daniel Gafford really hurts them, where, if Al Durham is able to get downhill here, there's not the same rim protecting presence that there is when Gafford's on the floor. So he's able to create some separation, get downhill, and you see this guy's going to have to slide into the lane to cut off this penetration. And Indiana could be spacing the floor better here. I think Evan Fitzner should probably be standing behind the three-point line. He's setting a screen right here. You've got some action kind of going on the baseline. I think Al Durham maybe went a little bit before, a little early than Indiana wanted him to. But nevertheless, he gets downhill, and you're going to see the help defense come. And you really get it from two sides. And it's, we've talked all season long about how Justin Smith is going to have to hit jump shots if Indiana's going to be at their best. And this is another instance of opponents just kind of making him prove that. They're going to leave him open. They're going to force him to take shots. You see three guys converge on Al Durham, and Justin Smith is wide open for the jumper. But when he takes the shot, look at the shot clock. When he catches the ball, there's still 18 on the clock. And when he fires, you have 17. And so in these possessions, this is a win for Arkansas because Indiana's taking a shot that's not going to produce, the most efficient look for them. I think they might be better served to kind of hold on to this, work through their offense a little bit more, maybe see if they can get a better look. Maybe Al Durham waits a little bit longer to see if they can get in the flow of their offense. Instead, you get, a low percentage shot, especially at that point in the season, and Arkansas is running the other way. And this is a situation where, Evan Fitzner, I talked about how Arkansas is going to try to space the floor without Daniel Gafford. And this is an instance where you really see guys like Fitzner and Deron Davis. It comes into question, how well they're going to be able to perform on defense in this game, because Arkansas is basically just going to target Evan Fitzner and try to go right at him. They're going to, 35's got the ball. They're going to go right back to him with this little two-man game. And Fitzner does an okay job staying in front of the ball, but just isn't really quick enough to bother that shot to the extent that he should. And Arkansas ends up getting an and one.
Yeah, this does seem like kind of a tough matchup for Fitzner. Even if Gafford was in there, just the speed of this game, the pressure of this game, and this was, of course, coming on the heels of him playing against Marquette, which was a great matchup for him. And this one, really wasn't. And he played 18 minutes and didn't score, did have, 5 rebounds, but really wasn't able to do a lot. And that will be interesting to see what, if anything, he's able to do in this game, because I agree with you. And same thing with Deron. I think Deron can give you more offensively, because the tallest guy now for Arkansas is going to be 6'8". And so they're going to have trouble dealing with Deron on offense, which means when he's in there, we've got to really go into him, and hopefully he's assertive, because that's the reason why he didn't play much in the second half against St. Francis.
Well, and I think if you want to use Fitzner, he would be, if you go back to the IU possession in that clip, if he's the guy on the receiving end of that pass from Al Durham, you probably feel a little bit better about that shot being taken. Certainly you did at that point of the season. Whether you do now or not is perhaps a different matter. But, being able to have him, as Ben said, out there to space the floor, that would really be the role that he would have to serve at this point and with this team. So, yeah, I could easily see this being a game where he gets a little bit less run, and if Race Thompson is not sick anymore, he might be a better matchup for some of the remaining interior guys on Arkansas's roster.
Yeah, and Brian said in the chat, please don't play this lineup: Al, Finney, Justin, Demezi, and Evan. And again, just remember, Juwan was in foul trouble. No Devontae, no Zach McRoberts, no Race Thompson. And it was like the brief period when Romeo was out. And obviously, Romeo won't be in this game, but I doubt you'll see that lineup. That doesn't seem like one that Archie likes playing much anymore.
Don't think he's going to dust that group off, do you? No,
I think things will have had to go really poorly for that group of 5, because they just don't really fit well together. So
no.
All right, next clip, Ben.
Yeah, so back kind of on the note of Evan Fitzner and his role spacing the floor, we'll see a little bit of that here with another IU offensive possession. Al Durham is going to be kind of handling it at the point of attack. And again, with Romeo Langford out, he seemed to kind of be the steadying presence for Indiana during this game, because, like I said, with Arkansas pressuring the ball, Al Durham is a good ball handler, and same with Rob Finney. At this point in the season, those guys just weren't really the primary kind of lead ball handlers that they are now. I don't think they were quite as steady and as solid with the ball as they are at this point in the season. And so Arkansas was really trying, speed them up and make them uncomfortable. Now we have Romeo back in the game, kind of in this left corner. But what's going to happen here is mostly on the right side of the floor. And one thing I've noticed with Al Durham this year is that I think he misses the simple pass quite often. And what you'll see in this clip here is a few things. Number one, Durham missing the simple pass and, not giving the ball up as early as he needs to. Number two, the impact Gafford has as a rim protector and just his presence on the floor. And then number three, how things might be different with him off the floor, with his athleticism, his length, not really around to bother Indiana like he did in the first game. So Durham's going to, again, this kind of ball pressure defense. Demezy Anderson's going to snake back around to the top, and they're going to go into a pick and pop with Al Durham and Evan Fitzner. And this is kind of what I mean about missing the open man. Daniel Gafford's going to come up high because Fitzner's a shooting threat and Al Durham's a threat to turn this corner. And when he does, Durham makes the right read by going baseline. But what happens is two guys follow him, and by the time he's got a foot in the paint, Evan Fitzner is wide open. And you'll see Al miss this pass a lot when he's driving on the strong side and missing the wide open corner shooter whose man has kind of sunk down to help on the drive. This time it's on the pick and pop. And he actually ends up making a nice pass to Justin Smith, who makes a good cut behind his man who's not really paying attention here. But you see Gafford, watch the second jump here, just getting off the floor to challenge Durham, getting right back up to block the shot.
That was an athletic play.
It was amazing. And on the one hand, you say, okay, Justin Smith needs to finish that play and maybe be a little stronger around the rim. But on the other, if you're looking ahead to Saturday's game, Daniel Gafford's not out there. And how many other guys on Arkansas's roster are even capable of making that play? So I think that possession's encouraging for me if I'm an IU fan, because number one, you've got Evan Fitzner as a pick and pop threat. And if he's hitting shots, it adds a totally different dynamic to your offense. Number two, Al Durham is making a good read and getting toward the basket going downhill. And number three, you get some good ball movement. You generate an easy shot around the basket, even if it didn't go in. And so taking those things into a game where Daniel Gafford's not going to play, I think that's something that, has to be a positive and maybe encouraging for IU fans.
You're listening to Assembly Call Radio. If you're just joining us, we're doing kind of a Basketball 201 segment here. We're talking through some clips from the previous IU-Arkansas game. You can check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall, if you want to see the actual clips we're talking about. I think you might be a little unfair to Al Durham on that one. That would have been a tough pass.
That's true,
back to Fitzner. I mean, I do agree with you that I think sometimes he misses the simple pass and that he gets tunnel vision when he's driving, but that one in particular looked like it would have been pretty tough to make.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. And, I guess maybe the thing that you would try to change there is just the angle that he takes and maybe being a little more patient. But I agree that he ends up making a nice play, and so it's hard to fault him too much. It's just a play where, I guess for me at this point in the season, I'm kind of looking ahead to say, okay, who's going to be a primary ball handler moving forward? And then certainly, having noticed him kind of getting tunnel vision at certain points in the season in recent games, that's kind of one thing that stood out to me. And kind of going back before that had become a trend, going back and then kind of noticing it and seeing it kind of fit into this broader trend. But I do agree that would have been a tough pass to make, and maybe I am being a little harsh.
So how do you project Devontae Green into this game? Because he is a guy who obviously has been a huge scoring threat for Indiana of late. You could argue over Indiana's last 4 games, he's been the best player overall. He's had a really good assist-turnover ratio. I mean, outside of Juwan Morgan, really good assist-turnover ratio. But he's also a guy who at times can try to do too much against pressure. And I suppose that will probably tell the tale of his game as, how effectively is he from shooting outside, and can he be, have the same kind of measured, more consistent mindset, going for the singles and the doubles a little bit more than always trying to hit the home run, because that's going to be important in this game.
Yeah, it is kind of tough to project because on the one hand, there's a chance that he is the steady ball handler, the guy who can handle that pressure and kind of get you into your sets without turning the ball over, and because he's got a good handle and he can do some things with the ball in his hand. But on the other hand, he is turnover prone, and against a team that really wants to force turnovers and put pressure on his opponents, that could be a really big negative. If he tries to do too much, if he tries to force passes, if he gets, maybe a little sloppy or careless with the ball and tries to do things that aren't really within his skill set, that could be an issue for Indiana if he ends up turning the ball over too much. I guess the two guys I kind of look at are Durham and Rob Finney, because like I said, they weren't really as established early in that first game. And without Romeo Langford, I think those guys are a little bit more, just a little more solid at this point in the season, and they can handle the ball a little bit better. I don't think they're as phased by that athleticism, that pressure that Arkansas threw at them in the first game. And I think they're poised to play big minutes, especially without Durham coming off that big game in the first round of the NIT. But I think certainly Devontae Green, in addition to handling the ball, he just gives Indiana a different element in terms of shooting, because like I showed in that first clip, Arkansas is going to help if they get beat off the dribble. They want to apply that pressure, but if the guy guarding the ball gets blown by, there's got to be that help defender sliding in. And so if that's Devontae's man and he keeps shooting the ball the way he has been, that could be a really big asset for Indiana, just having a guy who can spot up and shoot.
By the way, Coach Tonsoni, the new president of the Devontae Green fan club, is in there in the chat mob predicting another game ball for Devontae. So how things have changed as the season has evolved.
Just when you thought this season couldn't get any weirder, here we are. The only thing that I would add, I do think having, the one thing we probably haven't seen a lot of that lineup with Al and Devontae and Rob in the way that we saw it against St. Francis. I think it does, give IU a good stable of ball handlers to be able to have out there during the course of the game and against pressure like that. If you can find either a matchup that you like or some way to break the press, I think having those guys all out there will be good. The only other thing that I would bring up is the guy who seems to be the beneficiary of Gafford being out is Reggie Chaney, who was the number 35 that was in one of the clips that Ben had. He is, I noticed in the first game, he had 3 blocks, as did Gafford. And just in looking at his game log, he played 28 minutes against Providence with 7 of 9 from the floor and had 7 blocks. So apparently, he's, a miniature version of Gafford in some way or something. So I think he's really, if you're looking at a player from an Arkansas standpoint, probably one that has a really big swing on how the game goes. If you're able to contain him, get him in a little bit of foul trouble, that makes them even thinner on the front line. If you're not able to do that, and he has a game similar to what he had against Providence, that likely bodes pretty well for Arkansas.
Yep. All right, coming up in our third segment, we are going to start answering your questions, beginning with a question that we typically get at least once or twice a week. How will Indiana improve its shooting next year? We have some thoughts. We've talked about it on previous shows. We want to hear Ben's thoughts on that. So we'll talk about that next. Stick with us. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I am Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ben Ladner. Remember that you need to be subscribed to our email newsletter. We send out a weekly IU news roundup, even during the offseason, and after every game, we send out a detailed post-game analysis.
There's a high-level operation going on out there.
It certainly is this year, since Ben and Seth have been writing them and doing a great job. Text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com so that you can join that newsletter.
Make no excuses.
Exactly. Just go do it. All right. We're going to dip into the mailbag early here. We got some good questions, so I want to see how many of these we can hit before our time is up. So we got this question from Bill. Do we have any shooters coming in? I mean, good, consistent shooters that can hit the three at a decent percentage and be considered a weapon? Andy, we get some version of this question every single week. Always people talking about shooting. Real quick, just to remind folks, Armon Franklin is signed for 2019. He's not necessarily known as like a Jordan Hulse type shooter, but he has really improved as a shooter. And I think he projects as a guy who's going to have a solid three-point shot at this level. It may take him a year to adjust, as it often does for guys, but he projects as a pretty good three-point shooter. I would say, like, as a high school senior, he maybe isn't quite as good as of a shooter as Robert Johnson, but I think he can be that kind of shooter, maybe like a notch below, but a good shooter. And then after that, Trace Jackson Davis is not a shooter, a good player, but not a shooter. And then we'll have to see. There's still, there's another scholarship open. They're going to look at the grad transfer market, have to think shooting is what they're going to target. So that said, I would expect more help to come. The angle that I'm interested in, though, and we got another question that kind of led us in this direction. I want to get your thoughts, Ben, is what reasons are there to think, independent of signing 2 grad transfers that are 50% three-point shooters, why should we think that this Indiana team can become a better shooting team? Because it has killed us the last 2 seasons that we haven't been able to make outside shots. For a number of reasons, I feel like we will be a better shooting team next year, even if other areas suffer. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's kind of a tricky question, and it's one that I've thought about for the last couple of years or so, and I don't totally know. The shooting woes have just been confusing. I don't really know what the deal is with that. I think you look at guys, the biggest thing I look at as far as projecting shooting forward, looking at who's going to be a good shooter, is there going to be improvement, things like that, is just the shooting stroke itself. And certainly results are important. And if a guy's a 20% three-point shooter, in a decent sample size, you're probably not going to expect that he's going to be a great shooter moving forward. But if you have a decent sample and a guy's not a terrible shooter and he's got a good stroke, I generally take that, and kind of use that to project forward. And so, I think a good example of that is a guy like Al Durham, who coming into this year, he wasn't the greatest three-point shooter his freshman year, but I looked at him as a guy who has a nice stroke. If he could get a little more right or a little less right hand in that stroke, could be a pretty good shooter. And thus far this season, he has been. I think Rob Finney's the same kind of guy. He's got a little bit of a left to right rotation, kind of a shoulder rotation in his shot when he rises up. I don't know that necessarily is going to make or break his prospects as a shooter, but I think he's got a good looking stroke. I think he's going to shoot it moving forward. I think Armaan Franklin has a beautiful shooting stroke and could really end up being a nice shooter. I think he's going to be able to shoot it right away when he comes into college. I think, just judging on the limited, kind of film and games that I've been at of his, I think he's going to be maybe surprising to some fans just in terms of how well he can shoot from day one. Aside from that, I don't know that there are a ton of guys on the team who come back as, knockdown guys unless, somehow Romeo Langford stays or something and he reworks his jump shot. But that's, there's about a 1% chance of that happening, I think. So I would highlight those three guys maybe as as three guys who could maybe provide some of that outside presence moving forward. Certainly you lose Fitzner, and he didn't even shoot it that well this season. But the grad transfer market, I think, is what you look at and just say, okay, who is the best shooter that we can bring in? Who has the most versatility to their jump shot? Is there someone who can shoot off screens, off the move, off the dribble, off the catch, whatever? Is there someone we can bring in who can really galvanize our offense as a shooter and really provide that element? I think those are the kinds of people that you'll look at to bring in on the grad transfer market.
By the way, you really infringed upon Ryan's territory there, but you did a really good job of it, so it's okay. Andy, your thoughts?
I would agree with a lot of what Ben said. I think you look at a guy like Al Durham, who's basically doubled his number of 3-point attempts and gone up 7-8% as a 3-point shooter to about 36% where he is now versus I think 29 or so that he was last year on about 50 attempts. So to me, there's a component of it that is you can go back and find guys who really worked on their shot and really just put in a lot of time to get to be better 3-point shooters. I mean, everybody would, IU, it's like a cottage industry of comparing guys to Victor Oladipo, but there's an element to that where he, his sophomore year, even he was 10 of 48 from three, and then came back on still limited attempts, only took 68 as a junior, but made 44% of them. So I think you see the opportunity for guys to do that. I think particularly you'll see some of those jumps from freshman to sophomore season. Yogi was certainly playing a much different role, but his 3-point percentage jumped a lot just from his freshman to sophomore season. I think you could see that from Finney because I think we've seen enough of him being able to knock down shots that you feel like it's in there. It's just a matter of repetition, and he hasn't shot the ball well while other parts of his game have kind of come back toward the end of the season. That's one area that hasn't really rebounded as much to where it was when he was really playing well. So I think those are a couple of reasons. Armaan, another guy, seems to really have worked on his shot and improved quite a bit as a senior. So those things are good, but I do think you need to figure out who are some other guys that would be able to help you space the floor, because that's really, all of the guys we've talked about so far are guards, and in, modern basketball, you're going to need one of your front court players to be able to stretch the floor a bit as well. That was the reason that Fitzner was brought in. Juwan's been up and down from a 3-point shooting perspective. So I think you need to figure out who that guy can be. Is that, Race Thompson, can he develop some kind of, threat as a 3-point shooter? Jerome Hunter coming back would likely fall into that category as well. But I do think you need to figure out how you, whoever else is going to come in and fill additional roster spots on the team. I think shooting is going to be really prioritized in whatever those positions are. I think, if you said you're going to bring in two guys, it feels like you need one big and one guard. And I think you'd probably look for some kind of shooting ability in both, and the ability to space the floor.
And, and the other thing, Ben, is you look at it, over 200 of Indiana's attempts were made by Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan, who combined shot about 28.5%. So on the one hand, it would stand to reason that the 3-point distribution will go to better shooters because it won't be those guys taking up as many. On the other hand, those guys hit some really big threes, like, that won Indiana some games, even though you might argue they shot Indiana out of some other games. But it's also the attention that they drew. How will the 3-point looks be for Devontae and Al and Rob without the attention that those guys draw? And that's where Deron Davis being healthy and being a threat, Trace Jackson Davis being a guy who can contribute from day one, and whoever else they get, that becomes a big question. Because you can't just automatically say, well, Devontae is going to shoot 41.6% next year like he is this year. He's gotten some open looks because a lot of times he's out there as the 4th or 5th option, and that won't be the case next year without those guys there. So, where do you kind of stand on how that might end up shaking out?
Yeah, it's a good point. It kind of leads me into my next point, which was I think, maybe the reason I highlight guys like Finney and Durham and the reason they're going to be so important is because not only do you need guys who can knock down shots, catch and shoot, spot up, come off screens, etc. I think this offense needs someone who can shoot threes off the dribble. And this year you look at the team and Romeo Langford has done that at times, but his percentage is not great. Say what you will about Devontae Green, but he's been able to knock down some big pull-up threes this year. But for the most part, Rob Finney is not really a guy who's going to turn the corner off of a screen and pull up for three. Al Durham's not the kind of guy who's going to come off a pick and roll, rise and fire for a three. And so for me, I look at those guys and their games. I think the next evolution is, in addition to being able to catch and shoot and, maybe take one dribble, a sidestep or something like that, being able to handle the ball, work in the pick and roll, and incorporate the three-pointer as part of their game off the dribble and in the pick and roll. Because you look at some of the best guards in the Big Ten, guys like Cassius Winston, Carson Edwards. I mean, even Xavier Simpson is not the world's greatest shooter, but he at least is able to kind of pose a threat out of the pick and roll there. I think even guys like Glenn Watson at Nebraska, guys who can shoot off the dribble, pull up for three. If you want to expand it to the ACC, Kobe White, Ty Jerome, guys who can come off screens, pull up for three, and add that element to your offense. Indiana just doesn't really have that. And so as a result, they're not really able to generate threes outside of catch and shoot looks from the post, kickouts off of drive and kicks, things like that. And it just makes the offense a little bit more predictable. And so I think you need guys like Armaan Franklin, Rob Finney, Al Durham to be able to just, off of a few dribbles, be able to rise and fire and just keep the defense on their feet a little bit more. I think that would really make the offense a little bit more dynamic.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. All right, coming up in our final segment, we're going to answer some more of your questions, including one about why Indiana had such poor starts this season and whether that is something we should expect from Archie Miller's teams in the future. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. We'll talk about it. You are listening to the Assembly Call. We are wrapping up another week of talking IU basketball. I'm Jerod Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ben Ladner, and we're doing some mailbag questions, and we always take our mailbag questions from our private IU basketball discussion community, which you can learn more about at assemblycall.com/community. So, Andy, I want to get your thoughts on this question from Max. He says, we've seen some really horrible first halves, start of second halves this season, and then some truly impressive comebacks, a lot of them that ultimately fell short. I think some of the credit for the furious comeback should go to Archie, but so should some of the blame on coming out so lackadaisically. Do you think this will be an issue throughout his tenure?
I certainly hope not, because many more. I mean, I think this season, quite honestly, has been a lot of this, a lot of the same way here. He talked about it at the St. Francis game about how he really had to, get into the team at halftime to be able to, get him to come out and play. I think a little bit of that is, give it one more year, maybe two, and then I think you can really start to form a better opinion on that. Because I think some of that is, culture related, just in terms of, having guys who are really going to come out and try to jump on somebody. And for whatever reason, this just is not a team that's been able to do that. And even in some of the games where they have come out and played really well at the beginning, they've given the lead away and not played well in other times. So I do think, you want to see as he gets more of, quote unquote, his guys in there, how much that happens. But I think if you still see that, then I think it may be something else to do from a routine standpoint, just in terms of what your, warm-up routine, those kinds of things, what you're doing coming out of the locker room to be able to, focus in on what you need to do at the start of games, at the start of halves, because we've seen too many times from this team. It's great to come back, but in order to come back, you have to have dug yourself a pretty big hole, which means that something else went wrong. So I kind of agree with the general sentiment of it, where you want to give credit for that, but you also look back and say, hey, what could have been done differently? And I think you look at the season the same way. Of you watch Archie after the Minnesota game, say that was a deal breaker. You see some of the things that are done after that, and you say, hey, that's great. This guy was able to turn this around when things looked really dire. And then the flip side is you have how did it get to the point that it got to where you lost that many games, and on the heels of playing better, how does that performance in the Ohio State game or against Ohio State in the Big Ten tournament happen? So it's a little bit of both, I think, but I'm willing to give it about another year or so, see if that's something that changes as Archie really puts his stamp on the program. And if not, then I think there's not coaching changes that need to be made, but I think it's more just routine changes, how you go about preparing for the game, preparing for the second half.
And just player changes. I mean, Coach said in the chat, a lot of those issues are player related. I tend to agree. I mean, I think this year you had two stars who kind of like to ease their way into games. Now, Juwan a lot of times will come out ready in the second half, but he and Romeo like to ease their way into games. So who are you relying on then? A bunch of underclassmen, none of whom are really type A personalities. So I think a couple things that will help are, as a guy like Al Durham, who does tend to bring really consistent energy, becomes an upperclassman and becomes more of a tone setter. Freshmen that you're relying on, like Rob Finney, he'll get more consistent as he gets older. When you rely on a lot of freshmen, they're going to be inconsistent. And then, whether the light ever turns on for a guy like Justin Smith, we'll see. But I think Archie's just going to have to recruit some more type A personalities. I mean, you got to have some Yogi Ferrells. You got to have some Victor Oladipos. You got to have some Thomas Bryants, some guys who can help balance out, for example, like an OG Anunoby. So you can kind of get that balance, but you need some of those type A personalities that just kind of get things going. And I think this team didn't really have those guys. And I have to, that's how Archie is. I have to think that he's going to be trying to identify that when it comes to recruiting. Ben, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with what both of you guys said. I think, veteran teams that have an identity, they tend to kind of come out with more, maybe not more energy, but just a better idea of what they want to do. They execute better. They don't really have these kind of early game blips where they have to figure out, what's the game going to be like? What's the tone of the game? How do we adapt to that? They're the tone setters. They come out and they establish that themselves, and they dictate that. So I think I agree, getting in Archie's types of guys, getting a culture, a program, guys who have been in it for a few years, and just having, I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily to be the type of player who eases your way into a game, but I don't think you can have 12 of those guys. You need guys who can kind of come out and play with energy at the start. Guys, if you have a more complementary talent, you need kind of those more assertive alpha types of talents to really, coexist with one another. So I would agree with what both you guys said. I just think it's a matter of time before Archie kind of starts to instill, I guess, his culture, his system, things like that, to kind of get everybody on the same page. As far as what they do in the locker room, scouting reports, film sessions, things like that, I can't necessarily speak to how they approach games, but I have tried to pay attention, before games, being around the court, just to like, what's the vibe around the team? How are they warming up? What's the energy around it? And, some games you'll notice that they're really tight. They seem like they're kind of really focused and dead set on the game. Other games, I think the St. Francis game was like this. They come out, they're a little looser. They're having a good time in warmups. I don't know that one approach is necessarily better than the other. I think it's obviously important to be locked in, but it's also important to be kind of, loose and ready to go and not to put too much pressure on yourself. So I don't necessarily know that there's a correlation between, how they come out in warmups versus how they play. Maybe I should have charted this all season long. But I think, just with a couple more years, they can kind of start to establish more of a culture and kind of figure these things out.
All right, Ben, real quick. We had about 40 seconds left, and we talked about this on the postgame show, so I'll get your thoughts on it. This is from Kurt. How big of an opportunity do Devontae, Allen, Rob have with Romeo out? And we don't know how long Romeo will be out, but as long as he is, to assert ownership of the program through the NIT, potentially on the way to New York.
Yeah, I wrote about that in the post-game email a little bit about just, I think the balance with Romeo out kind of benefits those guys, because as opposed to being slotted into these role player, roles where they don't really know where their shots are going to come from and they kind of have to pick their spots, they get a little bit better idea of when they're going to have the ball, where they're going to have the ball, how they can score. things like that. You saw that I think all three of those guys have pretty solid games in their own rights. Ownership of the program, I don't necessarily know that there's a chance to do that, but just for the rest of the tournament here, I do think they have a big opportunity.
Yep. All right, that is going to have to do it for us on this week's edition of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us
and the chat mob
at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. And you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Thank you for listening. As always, we will talk to you after the game on Saturday after IU Arkansas. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
Thank you for being here and for listening to this episode of the Assembly Call. We appreciate it. And we really do rely on the support of audience members like you to keep our show going and to keep growing. And so we have set up a page on our website at assemblycall.com/support that lists 5 ways that you can support the Assembly Call. And we encourage you to choose whichever method is the easiest and most convenient for you. One of the methods is donating, and so many of you have donated, and we appreciate it so much. On that page, you can choose a monthly recurring donation or an annual recurring donation or just a one-time donation, whatever works for you. And if you don't want to donate, another way to support the show is you can use our affiliate URLs, iutickets.shop or iustore.shop when you're going to shop for tickets or gear, and we will get paid a small commission when you use those links. But however you support the show, we appreciate it. Thank you.
And cut. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add there before we had to stop?
No, that was good.
By the way, one thing I wanted to mention, getting back to the question from before, that's why one recruit I think to really watch is Ethan Morton, the guy out of Pennsylvania. He's like a mid 4-star guy, I think like 60, 70. It's funny because like you read scouting reports of him and people are like, he's not really that athletic, don't really know who he's going to guard. He's not that great of a shooter. He's an okay passer. But everybody talks about like that he's the best communicator on the court that they've ever seen, and he just like plays real hard and he's a great leader. You need a few guys like that. And I feel like a guy like that would kind of mesh well with Archie, basically like a rich man, Zach McRoberts in a sense, when people talk about him, that's kind of the sense that you get, has more skills and more ability, but that kind of leader and consistent everyday guy. So he's, of all the recruits we're going after in 2020, I really want to get him. I think he'd be huge for the culture and the fit.
Might as well just try to get Brad Davison to transfer.
Oh, God.
That's what it sounds like to me.
No. I mean, they're in the tournament and we're not. So
that's true. Yeah, I mean, the player you described sounds a lot like.
Yeah, but Davison's a shooter, and he's also a ridiculous flopper, and I would not enjoy having that.
I will say, he is one guy at the Big Ten tournament I actually came to appreciate a little bit more. I still don't like the flopping, and I think Wisconsin their whole team's guilty of it. But I did like the way he played. I think he's got a little more offensive game than I initially thought. And you talk about being a communicator and kind of being dialed in and playing with energy. I mean, that guy is always doing those sorts of things, for better or for worse, as annoying as it may be. So he is not like an elite defender. He's probably not even as good a defender as he gets credit for, but he's maybe a better offensive player than he gets credit for. And he's a guy that I would want to have on my team, maybe not as a starting 2 guard, but I think in the rotation, he's a pretty valuable player.
I feel like you have to have guys like that with the pack line. I mean, the pack line, you've got to move in unison. And if you have 1 or 2 guys out, we've seen the breakdowns, so, even if you give up a little bit with athletic ability or whatever, if you have a guy who's helping keep everybody on the same page, that's valuable. So anyway, that's a recruit that I really hope that we get. So, and by the way, people wonder, why haven't we offered Anthony Leal yet? Well, it's because we're involved with guys like him and Caleb Love, and, right now that doesn't project to be a huge class. So they're kind of trying to balance, these are guys that would really fit well, but then at the same time, Leal's a great shooter, and you need shooting. And when you have a really good shooter in your backyard, tough to pass up. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do with that recruiting class. Yeah, it's an important one. Anyway, any final thoughts? Andy, Ben?
No, I'm good.
That's all I got.
Watching Wofford start to pull away from Seton Hall a little bit here.
Ooh, are they?
Yeah, 25-16.
They're up by 9. It was pretty close for a while. I mean, there's still obviously a lot of time left even in the first half, but Michigan has jumped all over Montana. Baylor Syracuse already 18-13 with still 13 minutes left. I thought that might be the score of that game with about 7 minutes left in the first. Rock fight of all rock fights.
Very nice. All right. Well, Ben, thanks for doing this. Andy,
thanks for having me.
Thanks as always for being here. We appreciate all of you who are watching us barely as you're also watching NCAA tournament basketball, which is frankly how it should be.
Yeah, we'll take a secondary screen. It's no big deal.
I was thinking about that. Like Thursday nights are great for this show, except in March, and then Thursday nights are not good.
Except for this Thursday and next Thursday, but otherwise not bad.
Yeah, I don't mind missing Thursday night NFL football, but this night, okay. So enough talking. Let's go watch some basketball.
All right, sounds good.
Yep.
All right.
I won't see you Saturday. It'll just be Ryan, right?
Yeah, we'll figure out depending on if they win. I assume the game would be sometime mid next week before the NCAA games. I don't think they want a whole lot of overlap there. So
no, probably Tuesday or Wednesday. I would imagine
that would be my presumption as well. They the mop lady just tweeted out at some point in the last little bit like over 200 tickets I think in total people have given.
I want
to say 200 if I read it correctly, like 220. 160 to Big Brothers Big Sisters, another 60 donated to the general public. So
that's amazing. Wow. That's so cool.
Pretty cool.
That is awesome.
So all right, cool,
good stuff. All right,
thanks everybody.
See y'all later. Talk to you Saturday.